Hello, welcome to week 3. This PowerPoint is meant to give you some tips on the research paper that's due at the end of this week. A few people have expressed concern so far about how to write about one thing for 3 pages, and I just have some tips that I want to go over in this PowerPoint. And I want to focus on Jamaica Kincaid's Girl in case anybody is thinking about writing about that, since a lot of people wrote about it for their posts last week. So let's just look at the prompt real quick. It asks you to discuss one of the following in regards to a short story we have read in this course: plot, character analysis, setting, which can include place and/or culture, structure, point of view, theme development, tone, imagery, use of simile and/or metaphor, symbolism and/or allegory. So again, the prompt is asking you to focus on one of these, but my big tip for this week is to feel free to consider more than one element in order to enhance your discussion. For example, how does characterization drive the plot? How do metaphors work to construct setting or character? So I see these things as sort of working in a network together. So that's how I'd like you to maybe think about structuring your paper, but also thinking about how to talk about each one of these things. So to give you an example of this, again, I want to focus on Jamaica Kincaid's Girl because it's relatively short. So the plot of this. I'm not sure if this story actually has a plot. I know that a few people tried to argue that this week, and I think it can be argued. But we do have some questions to consider, like where does this story start? Where does it finish? And also, what can we infer about the speaker's past? There is a narrative that sort of we pick up in this story, even though it's not a linear sort of this happened, then this happened, then this happened, right? Do you think the speaker was given a similar set of instructions when she was a girl? How do you think she feels about those instructions? What do we know about her, and how do we find this information out? Is she married? Does she love her husband? Does she even like her husband? There's a lot of questions that this text raises that don't really get answered, right? So there is kind of this context that gets built that you can sort of fill in your analysis. What kind of a person will the girl turn out to be, focusing on the sort of the second person, the you in this story? Will she take her mother's advice or will she rebel? What evidence is there to suggest one over the other? So those are some questions you can kind of think about in regards to plot with this story. In terms of character analysis, you really want to ask who is speaking. On Sundays, try to walk like a lady and not like the slut you were so bent on becoming. One line reads. Who is also listening? We get the intrusion of a listener, quote unquote listener, twice in this story. One time she says, "But I don't sing Ben on Sundays at all, and never in Sunday school." How does the author use language, imagery, tone, and point of view to create these characters? So again, there's some intersection happening between character and these other elements. Setting, culture, where are we in this text? What sort of context clues do we get? We're told you mustn't speak to the wharf rat boys, not even to give directions. In that one sentence alone, we're sort of given a hint that there's a wharf, that they're maybe living by the sea somewhere. But also, what does this sentence tell us about the class of the speaker, socioeconomic status of the place? What assumptions is the speaker making here about gender, about boys and girls, about the person she's speaking to, for example? Structure. Does this narrative have some kind of progression to it? We begin, wash the white clothes on Monday and put them on the stone heap. Further along, this is how you iron your father's khaki pants so they don't have a crease. Further along, this is how to make good medicine to throw away a child before it even becomes a child. Is this just a random list of commands, or is there an organizing principle at work in this story? Try to explain or justify why you think Kincaid builds her narrative in this order. I think there's an argument to be made there that would require some close reading, and some close attention to sort of the different details that the speaker touches on. Point of view, really important in a text like Girl. What is the effect of using you, the second person, instead of I or she, the third person? This is how a man bullies you, for example. How does this position the reader to sympathize with the girl or with the person being spoken to? How does point of view work to create a tone in this story? How does point of view drive characterization and plot in this story? Or how does it service any construction of irony, right? So there's a lot that point of view is doing in this story that isn't just it's written in the second person. There are also a number of themes in this story. So, women and femininity, for example. What is a slut in this story? What kinds of labor goes into being a woman in this story? What kind of performance produces a girl or a woman? These words are sort of taken for granted in this story, but I think there's room to really slow down and define them and think about how they're being used by the speaker and how we're supposed to interpret them as readers. Sexuality and sexual identity. What does this mother think about men? From the advice she gives her daughter, what can we infer about her relationship with men, and what kind of relationship she assumes her daughter will have with men? Society and class. How does the mother want her daughter to be the kind of woman the baker will let near the bread? Why is she forbidden from talking to the wharf rat boys? Why must the girl follow so many instructions? And finally, tradition and customs. We get some hints about, again, thinking about setting, about the type of place that this is, but also, why can't she sing Bennett in Sunday school? Like, how does that disrupt the customs of Antigua? Jamaica Kincaid writes a lot about Antigua, which is where she's from. So I don't know if we can assume that this is taking place somewhere in Antigua. But thinking about the context of the author is important in this story too, I think. Tone. This is how to hem a dress when you see the hem coming down, and so to prevent yourself from looking like the slut I know you are so bent on becoming. How does our speaker feel towards her daughter? Is she disappointed with her? Is she angry with her? How might she be upset? Is it because she is repeating the tasks that were once repeated to her, and she's tired of them? Or is her daughter especially disappointing to her for some reason? There's just so many questions this text raises that don't get answered, and I think there's sort of room to speculate on the context. Imagery. What details are we given? What details are we not given? I think some of the other stories, a discussion of imagery will be a little bit easier to have. With this story, we're sort of deliberately not given a lot of details, right? This is how you set a table for dinner with an important guest. This is how you smile to someone you don't like at all. We're not actually given the details of like how we're supposed to smile or how you set the table, right? So what's the significance of that lack of detail in this story? And also missing from this story is figurative language and simile. Why is there so little figurative language and simile? And finally, how do the specific details of this story's setting and culture speak to a wider context about what it means to be a girl or a woman in any society? What are some of the instructions you were given as a child for how to behave appropriately? How does this story demonstrate that those rules are arbitrary, unfair social constructions? Another way to ask that question is, how would these instructions or commands look different if the story were called Boy and a male was being addressed? So those are just some things to think about for this week, and I look forward to reading your papers. Thank you.